Good morning. I'm Mary Leslie. I'm president of the Los Angeles Business Council. And on behalf of Nadine Watt, the chair of the LABC, and Brad Cox, our chair of the LABC Institute, I would like to welcome you to this morning's forum. I would also like to thank our candidate series sponsors, UCLA, thank you, and King and Spalding, as well as today's host, Oasis, for having us at this beautiful Waldorf Astoria. Let's just give them all a round of applause. And a special thanks to the LABC staff who made this series possible, particularly Adam Lane and Rachel Levy, who helped lead this effort. I'd like to thank both of them. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning in person, and for the group that will be joining us online later. You are at the 2022 LABC Mayoral Candidate Forum. 6 months ago, we began in earnest to plan a series of candidate forums for our LABC members. We knew very well at the end of 2021 that we were still in the midst of yet another pandemic wave, and that the region was in the midst of a major political transition. For the first time in 8 years, we will be electing locally a new mayor, a new city attorney, a new county supervisor, several new LA City Council members, and many, many more elected officials. What we did not know is that there would be an invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, that oil prices would hit $100 a barrel, and that inflation would be at an all-time high. And that will really matter to us. We began the candidate series last December with the candidates running for LA City Council District 5. And then we had the LA City Attorney's race 2 weeks ago, and heard from the top candidates for the LA Board of Supervisors District 3. All these candidates have presented their views and positions on key issues in this region, ranging from affordable housing, homelessness, sustainability, public safety, and ethics. But within the region, the city of LA plays an outsized role in addressing the issues, and perhaps no position is as crucial as that of the mayor of LA. The LABC invited the 5 leading candidates to the mayor's race for this event today, based on their ability to garner support and what their name recognition was. We are honored today to be joined by 4 of the top candidates in the race: Congressmember Karen Bass, LA City Attorney Mike Fuhr, LA Councilman Joe Buscaino, and LA Council Member Kevin De Leon. And the 5th, Rick Caruso, unfortunately declined due to a scheduling conflict. Today, each candidate will be asked to present their solutions to our most pressing needs and how they imagine the future of LA will look under their leadership. And our focus isn't solely on prodding policy positions out of them, but also on understanding the qualities of each candidate that will make them an effective leader. In advance of the forum, the LABC released our Homelessness Survey 2.0 in partnership with the LA Times. That was in December, which once again highlighted LA voters' priorities for incoming candidates for elected office. With homelessness in the priority issue, as the priority issue, and the need was stressed in the survey for strong leadership as one of the top concerns. If you have not yet seen the results of that survey, you can visit our website at labusinesscouncil.org. I also want to take a moment to thank and recognize our media partner for the series, Spectrum News 1, and our moderator today, Alex Cohen, host of Inside the Issues. She did an outstanding job 2 weeks ago with the top candidates for the LA County Supervisor Forum. You can see the forum on Spectrum Run. It began airing last Friday. I think it aired 12 times all weekend. Okay, so probably many of you have already seen that. Right. Spectrum One will also be recording today's session and airing it soon, probably in the next week.
Weekend of March 10th.
Ooh, weekend of March 10th. Spectrum News 1 will, we really want to thank you, and we want to thank your producers and all the team that you have here today. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Chancellor Jean Block. Chancellor Block has been a good friend and partner to the LABC. Together, we have teamed up and held many important forums. We've done a lot of key research together that has made major policy changes in the area of affordable housing, sustainability, and transportation. The Chancellor has generously hosted several of our important events each year. This year is the 20th annual Mayoral Housing, Transportation, and Jobs Summit. We will be celebrating it on April 13th. Please join us at the Lesson Center at UCLA. In addition, the Chancellor helped us out and helped co-host our inaugural LABC Mexo and LA Economic Forum. Over the last decade, UCLA has produced nearly a dozen reports commissioned by the LABC Institute, our research arm, and on the issues of affordable housing, housing transportation, sustainability, rooftop solar, and clean transportation. Chancellor Block began his tenure in 2007, and under his leadership, UCLA has grown its profile and stature. It is the most applied to university in the country. Yes. Yay! Has more than 1.6.
Sorry, Nady. Oh.
Whoever's out there for the other school. Okay, it has more than 1.6 billion in annual research grants and is at the leading front of some of LA's biggest issues. The campus has also seen historic increases in Black and Latino applicants, has applicants from low-income backgrounds who, for the first time, maybe the first to go to college in their families. Under Chancellor Block, two of the university's major research pushes have focused on mental health and making LA a more sustainable city. Thank you for that. Chancellor Block is a member of the medical school faculty and an expert on neuroscience. He earned his bachelor's degree in psychology from Stanford University and has a master's degree in psychology from the University of Oregon. Before becoming Chancellor of UCLA, he served as Vice President and Provost for the University of Virginia. He was also the Alumni Council Thomas Jefferson Professor of Biology. So please welcome our good friend and partner, UCLA Chancellor Gene Block.
Thank you for that introduction, Mary. It's great to be here this morning. So we're grateful for UCLA's decades of partnership with LABC and really privileged to co-sponsor the series of candidate forums. It's so important to hear from our candidates. This is such a critical race for the city. It's great to be part of it. This morning, we come together as Angelinos who not only live in, work in, and cherish our city, but it's people who will help determine its future. That charge may elicit some anxiety. The pandemic is reshaping areas across the country, and homelessness, a lack of affordable housing, and public safety concerns are troubling our region in very significant ways. Really, as we all recognize, in profound ways. These are problems throughout the country, but especially problems in Los Angeles. But alongside these difficulties also lie opportunities, and Los Angeles has put sustainability at the fore. We are really a leader in beginning to think about how to live within a changing environment. The entertainment industry has new reach and relevance, and LA's tech sector is expanding. We've seen that over the last few years as Silicon Beach and other areas become real competitors with other tech areas. Our city's ethnic diversity is increasing year after year, and we're seen as a model for a diverse megacity of tomorrow. This really is the lab for how people work and live together, and we can be proud of that. This is the Los Angeles that one of our candidates, likely, will lead as our next mayor. We have 4 out of 5, so I say likely will lead as our next mayor. But taking on these challenges and opportunities is not something they will do alone. If LA is to emerge resilient and ready for the future, it will require partnership. Every person in this room, whether from the private or public sector, is here because they're invested in our city's success. You're here because you care deeply about Los Angeles. We'll all play a role in building the Los Angeles of the future. Certainly, UCLA and our other regions, other extraordinary institutions, and we're really blessed with having a remarkable number of high-quality research universities. In fact, we're one of the most densely populated in terms of research intensity universities in the country, and they're all eager to serve. We'll continue to bring our teaching and research enterprises to bear on the issues of LA, the issues that LA faces, educating, training, upskilling, inventing, and innovating, and then, most importantly, transporting the best ideas off campus and into the public square. So we think, but we also have to think and we have to do. We have to be action-oriented. You already find the fruits of UCLA's research right in the streets of Los Angeles. And I mean literally, because one of our urban planning professors is working with the city to test a revolutionary surface cooling paint to counter the excessive heat generated by our roads. So we're actually right on the surface of LA working to make it a cooler environment. The graduates of our region's colleges and universities will continue to provide the engine that powers LA's skilled labor and the knowledge economy. And it's so important to make sure we have opportunities that our students stay right here. I'm always sad to hear of some of our great students leaving this region for job opportunities. We'd really love our students to stay here close to us. Our institutions will continue to be the hubs for community engagement, will continue to create jobs in the region, and our health systems will continue to protect the well-being of our city in the years ahead. The city of Los Angeles is at an inflection point, and the mayoral election will be a chance for voters to decide which direction they believe is right to ensure a prosperous and equitable future for all. But while the candidate forums like this will have an air of competition, they should have an air of competition, that makes it exciting, I hope there's also a sense of shared duty that'll animate this room. To be sure, all of us at UCLA look forward to a real partnership with LABC and with other great institutions in our region, and with the new mayor and all of you, in order to serve this city we call Los Angeles. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Alex Cohn, a longtime broadcast journalist and host of Spectrum news shows, Inside the Issues. Prior to Spectrum, Alex spent nearly 2 decades in the public radio working as a host, reporter, and producer with NPR, Marketplace, KPCC, and KQED. Please welcome Alex Cohn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our guests for joining us here today and our very busy candidates. We appreciate your time. I'm just going to talk about a couple of quick housekeeping things so we can get to the important talk that matters. First and foremost, I just want to note that vaccination status was checked for everyone today. We are giving all of our candidates, and of course our audience members as well, the choice as to whether or not to wear face coverings at any point today. Item number 2, time. It's of the essence. We have a wonderful timekeeper sitting right front and center here who will be letting our candidates know. For our very first question, we'll have 2.5 minutes. For most of the rest of the questions, we'll have 2 minutes. At the end, we will be making some time for audience questions where each of our candidates will get 1 minute apiece. We have very strategically placed our candidates today in alphabetical order by last name. We want to make sure no one gets overlooked for any of these answers. So Congressmember Bass will be taking our first question. Second question will go first to Councilmember Buscaino, and so on and so forth, and we'll try to move in rapid succession if that makes sense to everybody. Last but not least, you'll probably see on each of your tables some colored index cards and a couple of pens. As mentioned, as we get towards the end of our conversation this morning, we will be taking questions from the audience, so please feel free. If you want to jot something down towards the end of our session, we'll be collecting those cards, and I will be putting those questions to the candidates. All right, that's all the business end of it. We will be talking about a number of issues today that are hard issues. They will not be fun issues. So I wanted to start with our one fun question. The year is 2022. Randy Newman has decided to rewrite the anthem, I Love LA. He picks up the phone and he calls you for help with the lyrics. All of our candidates, starting with you, Congressmember Bass.
Lord.
In 2.5 minutes or less, why do you love LA?
Yeah.
Off to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Very exciting time, and I love LA. This is my home. I was born and raised here. It is the city that I believe we have the whole world here. I always joke with my friends from other cities and say, you know, if you want to go out to eat in LA, just pick the country that you want to go out to eat to, and that you can do that. We celebrate the various cultures here. We have the beach, I tell my other friends you can go skiing and surfing in one day. I just think that we have everything here. And we have everything here in a positive way. And then we also reflect the challenges of the country as well. And so, especially the experience I've had over the last 11 years in Washington, D.C., where I've gotten to see a lot of the country, you really begin to appreciate what we have here, just in every way. But I also think that we're the bellwether for the country as well. And so I'm so proud of our progress here in so many different areas. We were talking yesterday at the Candidates Forum about climate change, and I was complimenting my colleagues here on all that we've done in this city on climate change, where I go back and I debate whether climate change is really an issue. And so I think that sometimes in LA, we don't recognize all that we have done. Obviously, we have a lot more to do now, because I think one of our greatest issues is income inequality. I was listening to the chancellor talk about Los Angeles and all of its diversity, but it also presents its challenges too. We do have, to me, all of the knowledge, all of the skills, all of the resources here, but they're not put to use, to me, in the way that they could be put to use. So income inequality, as we move forward, I think that has to be the lens that we look at a lot of different issues, so that LA can demonstrate to the rest of the country the way the rest of the country is going to look in a few decades, because we know that Los Angeles will be, not Los Angeles, the country will be majority minority. We'll look like California. And so we are the lab that can set the standard for how we can have a diverse city, we can have a diverse country, and it's actually okay. It's actually our strength. So that's why I love LA. I love LA for all LA is today and all LA can be in the future.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Buscaino.
Well, I love Los Angeles because it's a city that welcomed my immigrant parents. The waters that brought my immigrant parents from Italy, that were able to come to Los Angeles to provide for their family because of the fishing industry that was once thriving. I love Los Angeles because it's a story of an 18-year-old kid working at his local park who was recruited to join the LAPD to serve this city as its own neighborhood community police officer. Only in Los Angeles, where your own neighborhood police officer can serve in the city of Los Angeles on the city council to affect change. I love Los Angeles, as Karen alluded to, because it's a modeled United Nations. It's welcomed everyone, like my parents, from around this world. But it pains me to hear from friends, family, who are considering leaving Los Angeles because of the challenges of homelessness and crime. That's not the LA that I know and love. And that's why I'm giving up my last term to run for mayor. This is the Los Angeles that I know, that I love so dearly, that when you see high crime, you see the demise of the quality of life for those who are living on the streets and those who are investing and who also are contributing to our Los Angeles. And it pains me, and this is why I'm running for mayor, because we need a leader who has a backbone, who's not afraid to make decisions similar to what I've done in my district. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you the actions that I've taken to improve the quality of life, to reduce crime, and my path forward and my vision for this city that I know and love.
Thank you. Councilmember De Leon.
Thank you so much, Alex. I was born in the great city of Los Angeles to an immigrant mother, a single immigrant mother with a third grade education. This was a woman who worked her fingers to the bone, spending the vast majority of her life taking care of the very wealthy. And I love this city dearly. And in fact, I love this city so much so that every neighborhood that I've had the honor to represent, both in the Assembly as well as the Senate, and now as a council member, has informed my decision making. Whether it has been the arrest and detention in Highland Park of Romulo Abelica, who was arrested by ICE agents in front of his daughter, dropping her off at elementary school. And that's why I introduced Senate Bill 54, making California the largest and first state in the nation to become a sanctuary state. It was sued by then Attorney General, Department of Justice, Jeff Sessions, but we won in the U.S. Supreme Court in 2020. Boyle Heights, which is a neighborhood where I cut my teeth politically, then organizing the largest march in the history of the state of California, Proposition 187. Also Boyle Heights because it's surrounded by 5 freeways. And that helped inform my decision-making when I made California the largest economy on planet Earth, to legally commit itself to 100% clean, renewable energy. Angelino Heights, which is adjacent to Echo Park, where I used to live. Young Chirupa Wang's Wistery, who was shot in the head. A bullet that pierced the wallet, I should say the wall of her house through the kitchen wall as well. And she fell and dropped dead. And I moved forward some of the most restrictive gun policies in the nation. In fact, regulating handgun ammunition, which has never been done in the United States of America. Who sells ammunition and who buys it? Because that's the fuel, actually, the oxygen that fuels the violence in our streets every single day. Handguns are the major cause of gun violence in the United States of America. It's not AK-47s or AR-15s. I love this city because it's a rich mosaic, an amazing tapestry, so many different hues, so many different cultures from all over the country, from all over the world. Whether you're a New Yorker fleeing the East Coast seeking a better bagel on the West Coast, you know, or whether you're Mexican or Korean or Filipino or like my good friend here, Italian, or you're African American from the Deep South fleeing Jim Crow laws, migrating to the West Coast seeking a better life. That's why I love LA, and LA can be a better place with the right leadership.
Thank you. City Attorney Mike Fuhrer.
Thanks, Alex. So I say, Randy, I'm so glad you called. Because I can talk to you through the lens of my own family. I would say to him, Randy, my mom grew up in Boyle Heights. She was the daughter of immigrants who came from Russia, but the boat was stopped in Havana, so they learned to speak Spanish. And I would say, Randy, this is a great story because my grandfather, Muña, opened up Don Manuel's mercantile store at was then Brooklyn Avenue, now Cesar Chavez. And my mom said I grew up speaking Yiddish and Spanish and Russian and a little bit of English. And she also said, and I would say, Randy, this is a big lesson for us. On the one hand, that typified what could be the best of Los Angeles. Mom would say, we didn't have much money, but everybody engaged and we got along with each other. And we argued and we debated and we came back stronger. But she said, I remember the time when all my Japanese American neighbors were suddenly gone. And my mom taught me, you can never stand aside when someone else is being victimized. And the LA that I'll be talking to Randy about is a place where we stand up for each other, where we don't just use the word tolerance as our highest aspiration, but we talk about appreciation and respect and understanding. I would say, let's go through the issues, Randy, that are now in the rearview mirror. I would talk about homelessness and say, remember the time when our streets were pervaded with homeless encampments and how we decided to take decisive action, calling a state of emergency that galvanized the public and gave the mayor additional powers. And we told our general managers that if you want to keep your jobs, you're going to increase the pace at which you cite and approve homeless and affordable housing. We look to the private sector to engage with the public sector on creating housing. And look what happened. I would say we transformed our mental health and substance abuse services on the street. And now people are getting the treatment they need. So homelessness is in the rearview mirror. I would talk about affordable housing and all the steps we took, and suddenly LA is an affordable place for people like my other grandparents who were the assistant managers of someone else's mom and pop grocery store but could afford a house. I would talk about an LA that is a safe place for all of us, where reform and having a substantial police force weren't viewed as in conflict with each other, but went together with each other. I would talk about a Los Angeles. I say, Randy, this is a Los Angeles that is on the cutting edge of every economic trend in the world. And I would say, Randy, I have to stop because the timekeeper told me to, but I have more to say.
Well, let's go into some of these issues that you've all brought up. You have all been on the record recently saying that homelessness is the #1 issue. The poll that Mary mentioned that LABC conducted definitely backs that up. 37% of those surveyed say that they feel unsafe in their homes and their neighborhoods as a result of homelessness and have thought about leaving Los Angeles. We will talk plenty about policy, but the question here is, starting with Councilmember Joe Buscaino, how would you restore confidence in residents who feel unsafe in their own homes?
Well, that poll is spot on. And I didn't need a poll to tell me the direction or the pulse of the people of Los Angeles. In fact, before that poll came out, I asked the City Council to place a ballot measure on the ballot that would focus on interim solutions, emergency housing, hold politicians accountable for not moving on thresholds, to build enough emergency housing to the point where we can have finally a no camping law in the city of Los Angeles, and restore that faith and confidence by getting it done, very similar to what I've done in my district. In fact, I invite you to come to my district. You will not find a large, dangerous encampment in my district because we have said yes to solutions. And my residents have restored now some faith and confidence because of how we solve the camping and the encampment issue in my district. And that's how we move forward, by saying yes to quick solutions, activating the Emergency Operations Center because we have a crisis. God forbid if there's an emergency, an earthquake today, we will activate the Emergency Operations Center. We have 60,000 souls living in the streets. And at the same time, have an ability to, per the Boise ruling, enforce a no camping law. We need the carrot and the stick because we have been a city, and this is why people are frustrated and angry. We've been a city that has been enabling this behavior with zero consequences, and I'm the mayor that has a plan based on what I have done in my district. And I understand the importance of moving quickly on this issue and also being able to have an end street camping once and for all in the city of Los Angeles, based on the action.
Councilmember De Leon.
The most important job of any mayor is to make sure that all Angelinos are safe. But let me underscore the following. If we can move heaven and earth to build football stadiums as well as basketball arenas, then we can sure as hell do the same thing and act with a sense of urgency to bring our unhoused neighbors off the streets and put a roof over their head. If we want to feel safe as a city, whether you live in Encino or East LA, whether you live in South LA or Sherman Oaks, whether you live in Westchester or Watts, there's only one solution, and that's putting a roof over their head. And that's why in the short term that I've been a council member for City 14, which by the way, is ground zero for homelessness in the entire city of Los Angeles. I have more unhoused individuals in my district alone than any metropolitan city in America, except for three: New York, LA in the aggregate, and the city of Chicago. So put this in magnitude to give you the magnitude of this crisis. I have more homeless individuals living in my district than the homeless population in its totality in the cities of both Houston and Phoenix, the fourth and fifth largest cities in America. But it's a question of housing. When I became council member, 1 week thereafter, I made a motion to buy 2 hotels on Huntington Drive in El Sereno, a mile-long encampment. Everyone's off the street, and they have housing, a roof over their head. We're converting those motels into permanent housing. I've constructed the largest tiny home village in the United States of America, not in LA County or California, but in the United States of America, off the 110 Arroyo Seco Freeway. In Eagle Rock, I will be opening up next week, or in about a week and a half, another tiny home village. The City Council has already unanimously adopted my visionary plan, 25 by 25, 25,000 housing units by the year 2025. It's the most ambitious plan of its kind in the United States of America. And the reason why is because you can't meander blindly in the desert without a set goal that holds elected officials accountable with baseline targets so you as an electorate can decide whether we did a job or not.
Alex, I actually want to be sure we're on the same wavelength here. The question was prefaced with homelessness, but you asked, the punchline was residents feel safe in their homes, correct?
Due to homelessness, yes.
Okay, because I want to be clear about this, because our homelessness emergency, and it needs to be dealt with as such, has implications for people who are on the street, where 1,600 people weren't safe because they died last year. And it has implications in our communities. But I want to separate issues for a moment. Let's talk for a moment first just about the homelessness emergency as a leader. There are leaders and followers in this issue. I said more than a year ago I would declare a state of emergency on homelessness, and opponents followed. 4 years ago, I wrote a piece that we've discussed a lot, Mary. It's a piece that said that if we had an earthquake, a FEMA field general would be in charge of recovery. We have the equivalent of that disaster. It's homelessness, and no one is in charge. And as a consequence, as mayor, I'm going to appoint a top deputy who reports to me, who consolidates all the authority of the mayor's office, all those departments focused on homelessness, and opponents followed. I said, every general manager who wants to keep his or her job is going to accelerate the pace by which we cite and approve homeless housing, or they won't have those jobs. I said when it comes to permanent supportive housing, we should cut that cost in half, because there's a private equity model that SDS is using that has worked in this city. We should build on that. I said we should change our street engagement strategies and say to people experiencing homelessness, the streets are no place for you, it's not safe for you, but our public spaces need to be safe and accessible for everyone. I gave the city council an ordinance 1.25 years ago that said, offer housing and services, and then you can enforce this rule, but not before. And mental health and substance abuse. The city and the county are at odds with each other. We should be working closely with each other because we have an open-air asylum on our streets and 1,300 vacant substance abuse beds in our system right now. We can do better on all these counts, and we will when I'm mayor.
Congressmember Bass.
Well, I think the best way to restore confidence in people is, one, to involve them in the process, to involve them in the solution, and then to demonstrate concrete results. And so as long as people see thousands of folks on the street, they're going to question what we do as policymakers. Voters voted in 2 propositions, and they thought that was going to solve the problem. I think that as a city, we did not communicate enough what the problem was. So yes, housing has been built because of the 2 propositions, but what the propositions didn't take care of were all of the new people coming into homelessness. So we have to deal with it in a comprehensive manner, and we have to bring the public along. I think all of us agree on the state of emergency locally, but I don't believe that a local state of emergency is enough. I think the state of emergency needs to be called on the national level as well. And all of us are involved in addressing this right now. So I do have some remaining months to be in Congress. And fortunately, we have an administration that I can communicate with, because for 4 years, I couldn't communicate with an administration because they were under strict orders not to talk to Democrats. But now I can call up the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I can call our Javier Becerra from Health and Human Services, and I can ask them to deal with some of the barriers. So for example, the vouchers. We have lots of vouchers, and we can't access. People who need the vouchers can't always access them because of barriers that are there. So I think we have to have a comprehensive solution. Income inequality is at the root of it. And then in terms of substance abuse, we need to redo our substance abuse system, because you mentioned the beds that are available, but the problem is the way the system is set up now, you only have 30 days of residential care. So what is 30 days going to do for somebody who has been on the street for years, addicted? We used to have a system where you could stay in residential care for a year.
This question will begin with Kevin De Leon. Late last week, we learned that the city of LA must rezone to accommodate an additional 250,000 new homes by the month of October. And if not, LA stands to lose access to billions of dollars of affordable housing grants. If you were mayor today, how would you go about getting to that point?
That's a very good question, Alex, because we have an affordability crisis in the city of LA. Our RENA goals are 450,000. About half of that has to be affordable housing. If we're going to stop the homelessness crisis, if we're going to stop those individuals who are barely holding on, perhaps 2 or 3 jobs, working their fingers to the bone, and not knowing if they're going to be evicted. I can tell you this, if we're not for an eviction moratorium, that's the only thing that's keeping the roof over the head of so many Angelenos. They would be living out on the streets today. So a couple things. One is today I represent downtown Los Angeles, and there's no place in the United States of America that is ripe for the most economic growth and investment anywhere in the country than Los Angeles, downtown LA. In downtown LA, the projection is roughly about 70,000 new residents. Now, we can't build horizontally, and the idea, the concept of single-family home, the front yard and the backyard, doesn't really exist in downtown LA. But we can grow vertically, and we have to mandate inclusionary in downtown Los Angeles, and we have to have that serious discussion, affordability throughout the city of LA. Because if we don't, what we witnessed during COVID-19 is the rich actually got richer and the poor got poorer. Because many constituents, not just mine, but Karen's and Joe's and Mike's, as obviously as a citywide, they don't have the luxury to isolate and hibernate in a 5,000, 10,000 square foot home. Perhaps Instacart, Whole Foods or Gelson's to deliver food to the front door. Or, if you want sushi or a bottle of sake, you can Instacart or Postmates. These are essential workers that are treated like expendable workers, relegated to the back of the line. So the issue of mandating affordable housing is absolutely critical. It's a political issue more so than a technical issue. A leader has to have the courage of his or her convictions to make sure that they send a very clear message to the market of what is expected in terms of development and what we demand for a city like Los Angeles.
Mike Pierre.
Thanks very much. I mentioned earlier that I, by coincidence, live around the corner from where my grandparents lived. They were the assistant clerks in someone else's mom and pop grocery store, and they could buy a house in Los Angeles. That house was on the market recently for $2 million. So that's where we are, right? So as mayor, first, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to give this charge to my general managers. How many of you in this room have sought to develop in the city of Los Angeles affordable housing and encountered one problem after another? My general managers are going to change that or they won't keep their jobs. Transit-oriented communities, that's a great program. I'm going to up the ante. We're going to expand the locations where those TOC projects can go. I'm going to make it ministerial rather than discretionary when we move forward. I'm going to assure that that process moves forward faster. Next, adaptive reuse. The pandemic has exposed what's happening in urban centers around the United States where commercial tenants are leaving locations. Let's take the advantage of adaptive reuse and transform those locations into affordable housing along with the commercial uses there. Next, school sites. We've had a dramatic diminution in the number of students attending LAUSD. Let's speed the pace of co-locating affordable housing so teachers can afford to live near where they work. And by the way, Kevin says, it's not a matter of rules, it's just will. It's a matter of both. And a mayor has to have a command of the issues to identify where the rules need to change. Discretionary site plan review should be changed from 50 to 100 or more. Second, we should be focused on co-housing issues. Other jurisdictions, San Francisco and New York and West Hollywood recently approved co-housing with people in single units living with a common area in between and sharing that space. Let's facilitate that new way of living that's affordable here in Los Angeles. People have this controversy around SB 9, but let's take advantage of a positive aspect of that, and let's say to people who have granny flats, ADUs in their backyards, instead of just renting out those units, use SB 9 and sell them, creating new opportunities for home ownership for folks who could never otherwise enter the market. It's a matter of rules, it's a matter of will, it's a matter of command on the first day on the job.
Congressmember Bass.
I believe we need to do all of the above. I think we have to be creative. We do have to have the political will. We do have to look at the rules. And then we do have to involve the neighbors in it. I've been to neighborhoods that are bitterly opposed to SB 9, but they also had creative solutions as well. For example, a community in the Valley was opposed to SB 9 because they didn't want to see the single-family character of their neighborhood change. But what they posed as an alternative was, look at the major commercial strips. Look at the malls that are actually not in use anymore and are failing. And so I think that there is a variety of solutions that need to come to the table, and we need to do them all. But at the end of the day, it is a question of leadership. It's a question of leadership, and it's a question of centralizing, especially any housing that is going to be developed to address the problem of affordable housing, but also to address homelessness, has to be expedited. And at the bottom line is that we have to convince Angelenos, we have to make room. We have to make room for 500,000 people. I know it's 250,000 right now, the plan that was rejected, and I know that the city has until October to submit a new plan. But we really have to, I think, as elected officials, as all of us are, it's our responsibility to convince the public that we have to all agree that we have to open up, we have to make room, we have to accept a variety of solutions. I also think that the pandemic and the change in workplace is going to provide maybe an additional solution. Because I wonder, in terms of commercial real estate, what is going to happen now that the work environment has changed, people are working from home, they're working remotely, that also might open up some spaces.
Well, let me talk about housing economics. Housing development, the economics of housing development is pretty straightforward, Brad, as we talked about. We know the cost of land and the cost of materials are predictable. And studies after studies show in the city of Los Angeles that shows how to get a project off the ground is not predictable. And that's through the bureaucratic red tape that we have seen over and over in the city of Los Angeles. And I am proud of saying yes in my district to housing at all income levels, from permanent supportive housing to market rate and everything in between. In fact, when you go to my district, again, I love the words expressed here, and I respect the words respect here on the path forward. But look at the action and the leadership that I've taken in my district. Today, in downtown San Pedro, because I was the first to move on updating our community plan, we have over 1,000 units being built as we speak. And as mayor, Alex, to get to that point of nearly 500,000 units, by getting to 1,000 units and being built, it took too damn long. And this is why. There's a lot of folks in City Hall, a lot of departments that are working in silos. And day one, as mayor, I'm going to develop and announce a Department of Development Services, that everyone is under this department making decisions together. Building and safety, engineering, the fire department, DWP, and I will be assigned to this Department of Development Services so we can streamline these projects and get them off the ground and make it more predictable. Because in development, time is money. And while people are suffering and wanting to be able to afford housing, and I'm calling, and what I've done again is the ability to say yes to housing projects at all income levels.
Thank you. This next question will start with you, Mike Fewer. Trust in local government is at an all-time low, which frankly I don't think is all that surprising given how many elected officials have wound up under arrest in recent years. To put it very bluntly, what's going on? Why is this happening? And what would you do if elected to turn the ship around?
Thanks very much, Alex. So ethics and integrity are the most important elements of any leader's character. Now, as a city council member, many of you recall, I came into office and I authored a law that said that a serious ethics violator shouldn't get a city contract. Alex, that law passed 8-7 on the city council floor. I wrote a ballot measure to increase the independence of the city's ethics commission, because I wanted that commission's work to be fully transparent and detached from any single elected official, and the voters voted for that. And I led the effort to create a code of conduct in the city's charter because I have such strong views about this issue. Now, as mayor, I'm going to have a chief ethics officer in my administration whose role is going to be not just to make sure people are following the rules, but that there's not even the appearance of any conflict or impropriety in the administration. There'll be zero tolerance for anything like that on my watch. But you asked a question that I want to dive into, and that is what else is going on here? You know, at the root of some of the issues you've described is our land use process in the city. And the fact that city council members have so much individual discretion with regard to land use in their districts. I want to explore changing that. You know, in other jurisdictions, San Diego is a good example, you don't go to the politician when you're trying to develop something, you go to the planning department because there are already community plans in place and those rules need to be adhered to. I think there's a major difference between that approach and coming to Los Angeles, where it is at the whim of the city council member whose district this is located that that's happening. So you have inconsistencies and a lack of clarity and the opportunity for some of the issues that you've described. You know, at the end of the day, the only way voters are going to believe in the integrity and quality of city government is not only that we place rules like I've described in place and explore changes like I've described, but also got to keep our promises. And I want to conclude by saying this. I've won 3 elections to new offices, and each time I make a list of everything I promised. And there is not a single thing I didn't promise as a candidate that didn't happen when I was elected. Thank you.
Congressmember Bass.
Well, I don't think there's any excuse for a lapse in ethics. And I will take my inspiration from President Obama, who led the most scandal-free administration in our lifetime. And the first thing that I would do would be a top-to-bottom audit of all of the processes in the city. And I do think it's an issue that should be looked at, and that's the Ethics Commission. And should that Ethics Commission be internal or external? In Congress, we actually have both. And I've also elicited the help of Norm Eisen. Norm Eisen was President Obama's ethics czar, and he has agreed to assist me in that effort. I just think that if you cannot keep the public trust, then how are you able to do what we've been talking about before, which is convince Angelenos to open up, the fact that we need to make room for 500,000 people? How can you convince people that we could keep the city safe? And so it is a bad reflection on the city, what is happening now in terms of the number of investigations and indictments and all. But that is something that has to be, I mean, as my colleague said, the number one job of the mayor is to keep the city safe. But we also have to convince the public that we can manage the city and that we will adhere to trust. We will have an administration that will follow the law. We will have elected officials that will keep ethics front and center, and that we will not go down a road of whether it's collaborating, getting involved in corruption. We can't do that. But we have to have the supervision, I believe. We have to have the watchdog, and the watchdog should be, I believe, an independent ethics commission.
Thank you.
Well, let me start by saying, unfortunately, there wasn't a chief ethics officer in the city attorney's office today. And I say this because the first day of the police academy, they told me never tarnish the police badge. Never tarnish the police badge. There are members of council, members of the city attorney's office that have tarnished the reputation of local government. In fact, had I known what was going on with members of city council, I would have put my own handcuffs on these individuals. Because that's not who we are as elected officials. We are held to higher standards. And what I'll do as mayor is call on an inspector general. We'll have an inspector general's office that will appoint the members of the ethics commission. Because when members of the ethics commission are appointed by elected officials, of course there's thoughts of favoritism. And that is the independent body that Karen just alluded to. What I will do differently is have an inspector general similar to what you see across the street at the police department. We have to restore faith, trust, and confidence, not only with the police department and the community, but also in local government.
When I ran for city council, my election was actually a referendum on corruption, given the fact of the trials and tribulations of my predecessor, Jose Huizar. When I got into the city council, City Hall was rocked once again with other allegations, another federal indictment of one of our current city council members, Mark Ridley Thomas. What I did, along with my colleague here, is we merely moved to suspend Mark Ridley Thomas. Unfortunately, it was not a unanimous vote like my predecessor. Obviously, there was some subjectivity with regards to the indictment of Mark Ridley Thomas, but you have to move quickly. I'm able to move forward my agenda in City 14, which is the most ambitious agenda, which I want to scale up for the entire city of LA, because I have the faith of my constituents in City 14. Moreover, when I was leader, when I was of your California State Senate, I actually already moved all ethics allegations, inquiries. I hired a former U.S. attorney who was appointed by then President Barack Obama to be the U.S. attorney for the city of Sacramento and that region. And this individual works outside of the realm of the Senate and then takes on all ethical inquiries when it comes to senators. So politicians are not investigating politicians. So this is something I'm doing. We've seen corruption at the highest level in the halls of Congress, to state legislative bodies, to governor's offices, to mayoral offices, to right here at the local level. But under my watch, there'll be zero tolerance for any type of corruption, because general managers and other folks who work for you reflect the leadership of this city.
We are swiftly approaching the anniversary of California shutting down in response to COVID-19. We are in a very different place than we were in 2020, but we are certainly not out of the woods yet. Given the powers that the mayor has and the powers that the mayor does not have, given the fact that we do have no idea where we might be with this pandemic and this virus come this fall, starting with Congressmember Bass, what would guide your response to this pandemic?
Well, my response to the pandemic will always be guided by science. And I do think that we have to learn from the last couple of years. And I think it was so sad nationally that we didn't have the leadership, so that people didn't understand the ins and outs of a virus and how things change, and then began to mistrust the leaders because they were back and forth. But I think that it's very important that we follow science. I also think that we have to continue right now, because even though our vaccination rate might be higher than other places, it's very disproportionate. There's still communities that are not vaccinated. So I don't think that I would think about it in terms of next year. I think that we have to continue to get people vaccinated. We have to have targeted interventions where there's a disproportionate vaccination rate. And there needs to be a lot of grassroots effort working with all of our community clinics, because the areas where vaccination rates are low is primarily in the African American and Latino community. And we have to have trusted messengers to go and communicate to people why they need to be vaccinated. So to the extent that we can continue promoting vaccination and the booster shots now, it will definitely protect us as we move forward. Then the other thing is that we have to prepare the public for the fact that they might need a fourth shot. And so that won't come as a surprise, and that won't create the doubts. We don't know where the virus is going to go. I do believe until we vaccinate people internationally, that's what's going to stop the variants. But we need to do the public education work now to prepare people. There might be additional variants. There might be needs for further vaccinations. But the focus right now has to be on the areas where the vaccination rate is low in the disproportionate communities, Black and brown.
Thank you.
Well, leaders have to lead on this issue. And when I was following the science, when the CDC said that we can open our schools, and yet our schools remain shut, I turned to the city attorney to sue the school district, because our kids, and I have a son, as a father of two kids at the time, that were in school. One was a senior, and my daughter was an 8th grader. They were suffering mentally and physically. They were stuck in a room when the CDC said it's okay to reopen our schools. We look at us today. We have universal access to vaccines, access to testing. We are living with this virus. It's time to put this in the rearview mirror, open up our economy, and end these mandates. In fact, I was one to oppose the indoor mask mandate because our small businesses were suffering in LA, where folks were going on the other side of the street or down to Orange County to spend their dollars. If we can attend a Super Bowl, 70,000+ people, if we can run marathons, I ran the marathon, I look forward to one running next month, and we are going back to Laker games, we are living with this virus. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. In fact, I voted the last 4 times to end these emergency powers. Let's get back to business.
Thank you, Alex, for the question, because I'm not waiting to lead on this issue to become mayor, because I'm leading on this issue right now. I've already submitted legislation so the city of LA can create its first ever public health department. Sorry, Zev. on that one right there. But we have to, because what we witness with the actions of the county is unspeakable. I'm also going to make historic investments, when it comes to educational outreach in all language to all Angelenos as we prepare, because there will be another variant. We will have another global pandemic. It's going to happen. Be very clear about that. But let me underscore something, because at the height of the pandemic in LA County, the district that I represent was actually ground zero for both infections as well as mortality rates. Everyday working families who were relegated to the back of the line for life-saving vaccinations, as well as PPE equipment. Essential workers treated, quite frankly, like expendable workers. Folks who had to travel to the west side to take care of someone else's child, clean someone else's home, come to this beautiful hotel and clean the rooms up and so forth and cut each other's grass. They themselves were exposed in huge numbers. And it's about leadership, because when the CDC came out, and there was no intervention, when the CDC said, listen, for the first stage of the vaccination, it'll be 65 plus. And then when you do the demographics and you run the numbers, for those who are hit the hardest, 65 plus for Latinos in LA County, that's only 14% of the population. That means 86% per the CDC were not allowed to take the vaccination. It had nothing to do with age, but rather who's exposed to it. That's why you need the right leadership on this issue, even challenging federal government entities who are not doing the right job. And I do believe in facts and science, believe me, but you need the right leadership. And that's why I want to establish our own public health department, like Long Beach.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So I've been, as you know, very forceful on the issue of the vaccine mandate. I called for it early. I've been defending it successfully in court. But I want to talk about what a future pandemic might look like and how my administration will contend with it, because leadership is a key. We know this because there was a recent report that was in the LA Times that noted that there was confusion in City Hall as to who was in charge. When I'm mayor, there'll be no confusion about who's in charge in the middle of a pandemic. There need to be clear and consistent rules. I held virtual town halls in the midst of the pandemic with small businesses in particular, and one of their major issues was the lack of clarity and the lack of consistency. I know parents felt that as well. So as mayor, clarity and consistency, keys. Next, communicating those rules is essential. There need to be, we've learned that government official communications don't work as well in many underserved communities as when peers are conveying that information. We've learned from that. And by the way, we train and plan for a disaster like an earthquake, but we don't train and plan for a disaster like a pandemic. If nothing else, this pandemic has taught us that that needs to be part of our repertoire as leaders in the city. We also know that this pandemic exposed tremendous inequities in healthcare in Los Angeles. Many of us knew those already, but they were in broad relief now. And even though the county is in charge of the healthcare responsibility, the city of Los Angeles, since our residents are affected by that inequity and no one cares among our constituents whether it's the city or the county who's in charge, we need to be leading to create more equity and access to high-quality health services in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. So these are all ingredients in the kind of leadership I'll provide as mayor. And as you listen to us talking about all these issues, think carefully about that first day as mayor and who has a command of these issues to be able to step in and shake up the status quo on day one.
This next round, answers will begin with Councilmember Joe Buscaino. What does an equitable economic recovery from COVID-19 look like to you?
Exactly what it says, an equitable and economic recovery that is fair throughout city lines, from Silmar to San Pedro, from South Los Angeles to Boyle Heights. And it comes down to the decision-making process. I found what we did, we pivoted as soon as the pandemic began, pivoted to the philanthropic community, making sure that our most disadvantaged communities in Watts, in Wilmington, and parts of San Pedro had access to food, had access to resources, Thank God for this, the angels in the City of Angels. We were able to advance hundreds of thousands of dollars of grocery cards to those families who are struggling. And we will continue to do that as mayor and ensure that folks get back on their feet quickly and equitably. And I'm proud again of what we've done in the course when the first pandemic first hit the streets of Los Angeles, and I plan on doing the same as mayor.
How inequitable Los Angeles looks like during this recovery is going to be really critical, and how we position ourselves as a global leader. And that also means disrupting altogether that school-to-prison pipeline that currently exists, whether it's San Quentin, whether it's Pelican Bay, Vacaville, Folsom, Chino. And so we can give our kids, our young men and women, an opportunity to go on to Cal State LA or UCLA. How we transform this economy and position ourselves in the clean energy space, and make sure if you're not going to Cal State LA or UCLA or USC or elsewhere, how can you go to a LA Trade Tech or Pierce College or Harbor College or East LA or LA City College and get training in the clean energy space? How we transform our economy with electrification in transportation. How we're going to build and maintain this infrastructure, electrification. How we're going to modernize this grid, this antiquated old grid that we have in LA City that's holding us back to be a global leader. Who are going to do those jobs? And how do we create a pipeline? How do we create a pipeline directly? So you don't need a PhD or a JD or MSW, or even a BA or BS. How would you create that pipeline? That's what equity is about. So you can pay the roof over your head, so you can accumulate some monies to put a down payment to buy that first home, which we have to build, no question about that. But that's what equity is. Because again, during this pandemic, the rich got richer and the poor actually got poor. And we're left behind dramatically. As Mike said, we've always known that these inequities were always in existence in Los Angeles. But my God, they've gotten larger, even more so, and much more exposed. So how do we deploy capital that's on the sidelines and make sure that capital can benefit everybody, so we can have a city of LA that works for everybody, not just somebody?
Thanks very much, Alex. I want to talk about small business, education, private sector in a minute and a half. So first, with regard to small business, I mentioned that at the outset because, as we know, most jobs are created in the city from small businesses. As mayor, I'm going to have a deputy mayor whose only focus is small business. I mentioned those virtual town halls I discussed with small business owners. I asked them, what do you need the most from City Hall? And in each of those events, somebody said to me, you're the first person to ask us. So I'm going to have a deputy mayor who creates a one-stop source of information for small businesses, who is the vehicle for assuring there's access to capital for small businesses. And that role is going to be pivotal to an equitable recovery, given where those small businesses need to be prospering the most. Education. This is not an immediate thing, but a little bit longer-term thing. Mayors have to have vision, then roll up their sleeves. I'm going to have an education and innovation officer in my administration, and I'm going to be focusing on tethering the major economic sectors of the future, health sciences, entertainment, a green economy, and so on, to public schools and community colleges, saying to that sixth grader, if you stay in school, here is a means by which you can get a good job immediately thereafter, looking around the corner to what the jobs of the future are going to be. I'm going to be turning to you, by the way. I want to create at least 10,000 internships in my first year as mayor in businesses like yours to give kids exposure for the first time in their lives to what it might feel like to be incorporated into what you do every day. I want to talk about the private sector very quickly in another way, too. When I was on the city council, we were in the aftermath of the Rebuild LA process after the civil unrest of the 1990s. It was a very top-down oriented process. We need you now. And as mayor, I'm going to be galvanizing an effort with you to infuse resources into the most underserved areas of our city where job, not just training, but job readiness and apprenticeships are necessary. Because we need each other in this city. We need to have a mayor who knows what it means to bring all of us together on this fundamental question.
Several major companies have left Los Angeles, Oh, Carol, Mike, forgive me. Congressmember Bass, my apologies.
That's okay. I think a lot of times people give lip service to the word equity. To me, it's a very concrete term. When the pandemic started, I was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I brought together the Black Caucus, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American Caucus. We all came together, and we fought for and won billions of dollars of resources to address the disproportionate way that we knew COVID was going to impact our populations, both health-wise and economic-wise. And so in terms of an equitable recovery, we know that a disproportionate number of African-American, Latino, Asian businesses went under. And so that means that those areas need specific attention. I think that what I would do would be to survey the businesses that shut down to see whether or not there is potential for them to reopen. I would look at the health situation. We already know, and I said before, that I know that the vaccination rate is disproportionately low in those communities, so then you need targeted outreach. It's a specific plan. And I think a lot of times, again, we give lip service to it and assume it's going to happen without a very specific strategy with goals that are measured by outcomes and not by process. I think that's the way you address equity.
Thank you for that. This round will begin with Councilmember De Leon. A number of major corporations have left Los Angeles and Southern California in recent years. Why do you think that is, and what do you think you, if elected, would be able to do to make this region more attractive once again to jobs and generate more business?
It's the quality of life issues. It's about housing. It's a lack of parks and open space. It's about congestion. It's about traffic. It is a city and a culture that makes things difficult for you. It doesn't allow for growth to happen. And that's why we need to change the culture, within City Hall so we can help facilitate small businesses. We actually do everything within our power to make sure we make it much more difficult for small businesses. And small businesses are the backbone of our economy. Thank God for small businesses and major corporations as well who relocated to other right-to-work states, whether it be Texas or next door to Arizona or out of the country altogether. Some of those folks have made decisions that I think are unfortunate. I know, for example, that I try to keep jobs here. I'm the lead author. I was the lead negotiator, I should say, of the film and TV tax credit. That was a $1.4 billion film and TV tax credit for runaway production. Angelenos spending the vast majority of their year in right-to-work states, whether it be Louisiana, Georgia, or elsewhere. Now we're keeping a lot of folks here in Southern California, in Los Angeles. We're seeing an explosion in commercial property in terms of sound stages, Class A property right now, especially in downtown Los Angeles. A lot of folks are staying here. They're not leaving, elsewhere. So you do need a mayor that's going to send a very clear signal to whether it's big corporations who have a lot of capitalization or small businesses who, quite frankly, are very vulnerable, don't have a lot of capitalization to survive. That we're going to not get in your way, we're going to get out of your way, but we're going to help facilitate your growth in the city of Los Angeles. If we had more time, obviously, I'd go much more in detail, but time? 1 minute? Yes, I got more time?
Yeah.
Oh, I have more time.
Put it up.
Oh, okay, thanks. 20 seconds? 10 more seconds. I got 10 more seconds. I do a great job. I do a great job. Trust me. That's my record. Yeah.
Oh, this is 1 minute.
Yeah.
These 1 minute.
These
are 2 minutes.
These are still 2 minutes.
Still 2 minutes.
Yes. Anyway.
You want to give me some of your time?
I'll give you, no, absolutely.
And it rests now with Mike Fiore.
Okay. I don't have to guess about why. I've actually communicated about this. I was talking to the CEO of a major corporation which moved its headquarters from Los Angeles. I wanted to know precisely what you asked, Alex. And here's what I heard. I heard housing costs are way too high here. It's very hard for me to attract talent, especially to come to Los Angeles, given housing costs. I've been very specific earlier about what I would do with respect to creating more affordable housing in our city. Next, the quality of education is an issue, public education. I mentioned earlier some of my approach when it comes to public education. I have a long record of leading on public education issues in this city. The mayor doesn't have unilateral control over the school district, but the mayor can have a major role to play on shaping the quality of public education in Los Angeles. I've mentioned a few ideas. We can go into some of them more ideally later. there are also other issues. You know, Gene referred to how the universities here. We have a wealth of university talent that could be galvanized around the issue of what the next major economic sector of our economy should be here. You know, when I was in college, Boston had the emerging biotech industry because BU and MIT and Harvard were on the Charles River. We have SC and UCLA and Caltech and so many other universities here. The mayor should be reaching out to each university and saying, let's identify an economic strategy for the future with your best experts coming to the table with me. And then attracting future businesses, going beyond simply retaining those who are here, of whom there are fewer and fewer every day, but reaching out and attracting them here because we are the center of innovation. And we know what it means to identify that next best thing that's going to be coming down the pike. So as mayor, I want to focus on those basic things that make a city thrive, as I mentioned earlier, because those are the things that determine whether someone wants to live here or not. And then I want to be doing some innovative work to looking around where Los Angeles could be plucking businesses from elsewhere, just like the mayor of Miami is doing when he competes with San Francisco for businesses.
Congressmember Bass.
Well, what I have heard is that businesses, both small and large, view the city in a couple of ways. Either the city government doesn't care about business or city government is actually hostile to business. And I think that that absolutely has to be addressed. It would be addressed if I have the privilege of being mayor by keeping a constant communication with businesses and having them at the table, having them help me design how we should move forward. But also, we turn on our television all the time and watch how Texas has a PR campaign that recruits our businesses away. But I have found that we don't do that around the country. I think we have an image as a state, and I think we have an image as a city as being hostile to business. And I think that we need to do a campaign that brings our businesses back. My colleague Kevin De Leon mentioned the entertainment industry, and that's something the three of us worked on together when we were in the state legislature, because we were clear that the film industry was leaving. We were watching it emerge all over the country, and so we took concrete steps to make sure the entertainment industry stayed here. So I think that we need to hear from businesses what they say are the roadblocks. It's always the bureaucracy. It's always so difficult to get things done. It's always the taxes. And we need to take concrete measures to address each one.
Thank you.
I agree with everything my colleagues have said on the stage, but let me bring you down to the ground level on what's happening on the street level and why businesses are leaving. Look at our streets today. Streets that are lined with these encampments, dangerous encampments. Half of the fires that the fire department's responding to are encampment related. Shootings, stabbings, sex trafficking. The core function of local government is public safety. And when businesses and their employees don't feel safe, they will leave Los Angeles. And that's what's happening. Coupled with the fact that we have a gross receipts tax. And I have seen how businesses have left my side of the street and moved over to Long Beach, to Rancho Palos Verdes, to Carson, to Torrance, because they have less of a gross receipts tax. Let's eliminate the gross receipts tax once and for all so we can bring and attract businesses, something that businesses have been calling for decades. And yes, we'll fill the $200 or $300 million gap elsewhere, but creating job opportunities and making a city that is more business friendly is going to be on top of agenda me as your next mayor. And over the course of the last 10 years, business, LABC, BizFed, the Chamber, have all come to me wanting to push back on these failed policies that are not balanced. And my message to these organizations is like, you got my vote. Talk to the other 14 guys or talk to the other 14 council members who are pushing these unbalanced, unsensible policies.
Thank you. The next round of questions will begin with the city attorney. I just want to remind all of our guests here today that there are cards on your table as we move towards the end of our event. If you've got questions to submit, please take the time to do that now. I want to talk a little bit about crime and public safety. In November, the Police Commission approved Chief Moore's request for a $1.97 billion with a B dollar budget. That represents a 12% increase in funding. Can we hear a bit from each of you about your particular strategy when it comes to both funding crime fighting as well as funding programs which would invest in the community? Starting with
Thanks,
you.
Alex. Great and very important question. So I was the first candidate on this stage to call for an increase in the police department. I said to 10,000 officers. I also believe there needs to be a focus on diversity, college education for those officers. I said that reform and a substantial and well-trained police force need to go hand in hand. And here are the reforms that I support. I support training to de-escalate use of force. I support embedding officers for 5-year stints in communities to earn the trust and respect of the neighborhoods they're serving. I support severing from police department roles, intervening with mental health incidents that aren't violent on the street. Instead of armed intervention, there should be crisis response teams that do that. I'll put in place an ambassador program where civilian ambassadors are the first point of contact for a user coming to a police station to make that process as friendly as possible. I also think that we need to be going beyond the police department, however significant it is to expand and train and have those reforms that I've described. I've long been a strong supporter of community-based violence prevention intervention programs. And while there's $5 billion in Build Back Better sitting in the Senate, we can't afford to wait to invest in those programs that are community-based programs. And here's what I'm talking about: intervening when someone is contemplating retaliation for a gang shooting, going to that hospital to intervene. Those kind of interventions are really important. Another thing, too, that we don't discuss very much is cleanliness on the street. You know, LA is a filthy place. I have proposed increasing by 1 million more hours a year cleanup and beautification in our neighborhoods. It's also a public safety issue. In Philadelphia, they had an experiment. They took a dangerous neighborhood, they cut it in half. On one side, they cleaned blighted and vacant property. On the other side, they didn't. A 29% decrease in gun violence in the neighborhood they cleaned up. And speaking of gun violence, huge issue in the city. I've been a national, not just a local leader on that issue. The Obama administration had me come speak to the White House, to governors and mayors and lawmakers across the United States about how to be an effective local leader in the absence of congressional action. These are all ingredients, Alex, of making LA a safer place.
Congressmember Bass.
I do believe the number one job of the mayor is to keep the city safe, and we're experiencing an uptick in crime. And I think it's absolutely important when a crime occurs, we have to hold the individual accountable. But I also think that we need to invest in communities because we have prevention strategies that have been well researched, well documented. In 1990, when we had our last, well, it wasn't an uptick, it was a surge in crime. We had 1,000 homicides, the Crips and the Bloods, crack cocaine. I left my teaching job at USC at the medical school and started Community Coalition, went to the heart of the problem to come up with ways to prevent crime. And so we developed a number of different strategies. One summer, we held a program in an area where there was a concentrated gang problem. And we went and we recruited people who were older, had been involved in gangs as younger individuals. And we recruited them. The young people in the area told us what they needed to have happen to keep them safe. We knew the hours and days of the week when homicides increased, and for an entire summer in that area, there were no homicides. That program was later adopted by the city. It's been developed over the years, researched by RAND. We know how to do these things. The problem is that we do not invest in them. So my public safety plan includes opening an Office of Community Safety. I want to spend the first year going around the city, seeing what neighborhoods need to have happen in order to be safe, and then investing in those communities. So you can hire 15,000 police officers if you want, but that does not, you'll bankrupt the city, first of all, but that does not necessarily lead to safety. Safety is a much bigger issue than that. We do need to make sure that we replace the officers that are due to attrition, but LAPD is having a heck of a time recruiting officers right now. And so we have to come up with solutions that are beyond hiring and expanding the police force.
Thank you. Councilmember Busquets.
Yeah, I can't afford to wait a year to go into neighborhoods because my neighborhoods throughout the city are telling me that they're afraid. when we haven't seen these homicide numbers. We're seeing the largest increase in homicide in a 15-year period. We are seeing violent crime, aggravated assaults, property crimes, all on the rise. Everything hinges on public safety. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to want to live here, as I mentioned, do business here, raise their families here. One of the first actions I'll take as mayor is to refund the LAPD $150 million. I pushed back. Folks said, you know, it's important to defund the police because it felt good at the time. And I said then, I voted against it, that if we take resources away from the police department, expect to see a spike in crime. We also, as mayor, let me point out, I know two programs intimately. The Senior Lead Officer Program that actually served in my own hometown as a Senior Lead Officer addressing quality of life crimes, quality of life concerns. I'll expand that and triple the size of the Senior Lead Officer Program. And then what we modeled, thanks to our friends at UCLA, the Luskin School, is scientifically proven to reduce crime in Watts. We modeled the Community Safety Partnership Program, and I'm going to take that citywide as mayor. And these two programs cost money. When we talk about recruitment, Karen, you're right, it's going to be tough to recruit folks. I'm actually going to incentivize LAPD officers to recruit residents who live in the city, like myself, that I actually served. I was a resident serving my own neighborhood. And that is a relationship-based policing models that we need to follow citywide. We also have a district attorney who is completely out of touch on what's happening on the ground, who is not moving on gun enhancements, gang enhancements, and I'm the first candidate to support the recall. I hate supporting recalls, but there's zero consequences when people commit crime in our city. And that is getting sent down to the criminal level. Commit a crime, you won't be held accountable. So I'm hoping my colleagues on the stage join me. In fact, a candidate who's not here this morning is playing follow the leader. I'm happy to see that that candidate agrees with me. And I'm hoping others do.
Councilmember De Leon.
I grew up in a neighborhood that had its fair share of violence, so I know what it feels like to feel unsafe. And the most important job of a mayor is to make sure that all Angelenos are safe and also treated with dignity and respect. Before we get into a conversation about hiring thousands of police officers or hundreds of more, it's like almost the price is right. You know, everyone wants to outdo each other with a number without any scientific evidence behind it. We have to get our own house in order, which means we need to better utilize our current resources much more efficiently and effectively. Two, we need to hire, and we will hire, a lot more mental health specialists to deal with the open air asylum on our streets. Who here has not witnessed or experienced someone who's running down the street half naked with feces caked onto their skin, yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs, having a psychotic breakdown? I want to get our LAPD officers out of the mental health front lines and back on the line of duty. Because at any given moment, if someone on Sepulveda or right out here on Wilshire Boulevard is having a psychotic breakdown, we have a team of LAPD officers there. And at the same time, we have someone who is a victim of gun violence. Or we have a small mom and pop restaurant or store that is being burglarized. We have to better utilize our current resources. I don't want our LAPD officers dealing with mental health, drug addictions, or overdoses, I should say, or homelessness. We can better utilize our resources as well as our own LAPD reserves. Our LAPD reserves, I don't want them at LA Live directing traffic left and right. I want them on the front lines, whether it's on Ventura Boulevard, on Lancashire, whether it's Wilshire, whether it's on Melrose, dealing with hot spots and how we can utilize them much more strategically.
Along with the issue of homelessness, crime and safety has repeatedly wound up top of the list on many of the surveys when Angelenos talk about what is most important to them. When you look at the crime stats, depending on the particular crime, depending on the particular neighborhood, some might be up, some might be down. But I think what all of this reveals is a real perception, a gut feeling that crime is up. When it comes to feelings of safety, feelings about crime, how would you, as mayor, starting with you, Congressmember Bass, how would you assure Angelenos that they are, in fact, safe, that that perception of crime is not something that they should be worried about at night?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to make sure it isn't something they have to be worried about at night, because I think that there are different levels of crime. And what I've heard going around the city, or rather I should say zooming around the city, is a lot of different types of crime, a lot of property crimes, a lot of people, you know, folks who their cars have been broken into or their houses have been broken into. The homicide rate is definitely up, but it's up in certain communities. And unfortunately, more than 50% of the homicides are not solved. And so I think that priority has to be put there. But one of the reasons why the homicides aren't solved is because there isn't trust between the community and the police department. And so we have to build on that. Representative Buscaino mentioned the Senior Lead Officer and Community Safety Partnership. Those are two very specific programs. One thing that I do know is that neighborhoods across the city, even neighborhoods that have had difficulty with police officers, do like the Senior Lead program. And I think that there needs to be increased neighborhood involvement, whether that's with neighborhood councils or not. But I think that having the programs in place where crime has increased, where we know how to reduce it, where we know how to suppress it, absolutely needs to take place. And again, there's a lot of things that people need in order for their neighborhoods to feel safe, even things like graffiti. You know, the cleanliness of an area. I don't think that our whole city is just trashed and dirty, but I do think that how the neighborhood looks, how people feel in that involvement in their neighborhoods does matter. And I think that an involved mayor, an involved mayor's office, police officers that build on community policing, all of that is helpful. And I think that that's what we need to expand.
So perception is reality. I understand why people of Los Angeles have that perception that crime is up. Crime is up, it's reality. But also recognizing the fact that when it takes nearly an hour for a police officer to respond to a non-emergency crime, nearly an hour. That's embarrassing. For an urgent call, about a little over 25 minutes. So, of course, they're going to ask themselves, why am I going to call the police when they don't show up? Or, due to the flaws of Prop 47, why am I going to call the police and the police make an arrest and that individual's back out within a matter of hours? This is where we need to, of course, my plan is to increase the police department, invest in community-based policing models that have proven to work, so you have that relationship with the senior lead officer, but also hold people accountable for breaking the law. Today, our jails are not open. Even lower-end offenders are not being held accountable for their acts. They get cited and released. When the police are doing their jobs honorably, and effecting arrests, just like the smash and grabs that they made, I think, 6 or 7 arrests, they were released back within hours. So of course, Alex, people in the city of Los Angeles are frustrated and at the same time feel that crime continues to be up, and that's the reality.
Although the spike in crime and the trends that we're experiencing right now in Los Angeles are not unique, they are a national trend. When you are a victim of a crime, or you're a family, a close friend, a loved one to a victim of a crime, that's something that's very personal. It doesn't make a difference if you live in Brentwood or if you live in Boyle Heights, communities that disproportionately have been impacted by the issues of crime. I represent Ball Heights, and we have a historic number of gangs. Many of them have been there for generations. Many of them have deep entrenched roots, into our correctional facility system. And interestingly, in Ball Heights, there's a strong number of folks who want more police presence, no question about it. There's also, a percentage of folks who believe that they have been profiled, that their human and civil rights have been violated as well. So it's not sort of they're incompatible or exclusive of each other, but they're in fact inclusive and compatible with each other. What you're saying, Alex, is what's the visceral? The visceral and what our empirical evidence states. And sometimes they can be really opposite, but this is politics, this is a mayoral race, and it's what's visceral to a lot of folks throughout the city of LA. And that's why I've said very clearly, my good friend here, Joe, says the issue of response times. Again, I don't want our LAPD officers to deal with social public health impacts on society, drug overdoses, homelessness, as well as the issue of mental illnesses. They shouldn't have to deal with that. And if not, then the response times can be a lot shorter, so they can move quickly and rapidly to violent crime that's happening throughout the city of Los Angeles. I want to go back again. We've got to better utilize our LAPD reserves. They have a gun and they have a badge. They can go on patrol. They only have 2 8-hour shifts every 30 days, and they're only paid $50 a month. We can better utilize and increase those ranks right there simply within our own and utilize them much more strategically and tactically.
My view.
So I'm going in this campaign to all 101 neighborhoods of the city. And I will say, everywhere I go, I hear people on edge, everywhere. And Alex, I want to gently challenge at least part of the premise of your question. When I'm in South Los Angeles in particular, where gun violence is up by 50% in 2 years, and I attend a vigil of a dad who is killed in front of his 19-year-old son just working at night at a Taco Bell with inconsolable family members at that location, it is not a perception. And so, as city attorney, I recently proposed a plan with specific steps to continue to reduce gun violence here. And because of my national leadership on this issue, one of the elements is borrowed from a colleague in Milwaukee who began this program that has had a major impact on diminishing gun violence on the street. I will say this is where, going to the perception and reality issue, transcending that very real gun violence issue, how the street looks is a big deal to people. And I think that it's easy to improperly demonize people, and that's something the mayor should never do. But it's also the case that when people see in their neighborhoods encampments on the street, it creates a sense of unsafety, a lack of safety for folks. And then when I was in Brentwood or Studio City or South LA, I hear the same thing. We want quicker response times. We're not getting them. In Watts, I heard, I just don't want to be profiled in the course of having more police officers, but I want more police officers. That's a fair request. So a mayor can't just say the city is safer. A mayor has to make the city safer. And those perceptions in each of these communities I go to follow a specific anecdote that underscores the reality to that person in that place. And last thing I want to say, by the way, is our police officers do not feel supported right now. And that has a huge impact on what happens on the street. One thing the mayor needs to do is boldly express support for the vast majority of our officers who are trying to police in a constitutional and effective way. So I think there's a lot to unpack here, Alex, when it comes to what's real and what's not. But I think we cannot resort to words alone. Actions are going to have to make a difference on the street to restore the faith you're talking about.
It is another beautiful day in Los Angeles, expected to be 80 degrees later on. That is lovely on many fronts, but not so much when it comes to our water supply. Drought is part of everyday life here in California, starting with City Council member Joe Buscaino. What is your approach to preparing this city for a drought-resistant future?
Well, it's real. And it's happening. We will advance on the policies that have already been approved by the City Council to embrace and incentivize drought-resistant landscapes, and knowing today that if you look outside San Pedro, there's a ton of water. the Pacific Ocean. Why aren't we maximizing the use of our waters along the Pacific Ocean? Something I've been approached, an idea of bringing in shipping containers filled with ocean water, and I don't know if Marty Adams is here or not, but being able to fill our reserves, our reservoirs rather, with ocean water. Why can't we do that? What we've done in the district as well, these are bioswales that we've advanced on amazing projects in partnership with Bureau of Sanitation as well as DWP, is Lake Machado, which is another great example in the city of Los Angeles on what to do on the recyclable water that feeds into the Terminal Island plant. And I plan on, as mayor, expanding those types of programs and projects throughout the city.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the question, because this is a critical question for the survivability of the city of LA. We can no longer rely on Northern California and rainy days. We can no longer rely on snowpacks up in Mount Shasta. I want to be very clear, for anyone here who believes that the Twin Tunnels is going to be the panacea for Southern California, I just want to gently say and diplomatically say, it's not going to happen. We can build 2 tunnels, we can build 1 tunnel. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to have a drop of water that's going to come in from Northern California, 400 miles, using all that energy to come down to Southern California. So we ourselves as Angelenos have to be we have to define the destiny of the city of LA if we want to be the future city of America. That means we have to continue with our 100% recyclable plan by the year 2035, unquestionably. We're going to have to conserve water more so, because during a moment of drought, on a per capita basis, Angelenos have increased their consumption of water during a drought. We're going to have to clean up our aquifers under San Fernando Valley as well as San Gabriel Valley, so we can store what little we can get from the sky. So this is a huge issue that's going to require major leadership on the issue of water. If there is no water, there is no Los Angeles. Let's be very clear about that. And we cannot rely, because of extreme weather patterns and what is happening with climate change with Northern California. We have to be in charge. This is going to be a major infrastructure of billions of dollars overtaking, but we have no other choice. And with the right leadership, we can do it.
When I was in the state legislature more than a decade ago, I authored legislation to require a 20% per capita diminution in water use in cities around the state. This has been a huge issue for us here. LA, of course, has done a good job when it comes to conservation. You know, we use roughly the same amount of water that we used when the city had 1 million fewer people in it. It's just not enough. Conservation is essential, but it's not enough. I was on the city council when one of my colleagues coined the term toilet to tap when referring to water recycling, and it deep sixed the idea of recycling then. But if you look at Orange County, for example, this is what people drink, right? So recycling our water is absolutely mandatory and is necessary to get us to the water independence, locally sourced water that we're talking about. Yeah, cleaning up our aquifers is important as well. And my office has been integral to doing that in the San Fernando Valley. But then there's another piece, too. There's also stormwater recapture, which is something that we have not taken full advantage of the opportunities to do here in Los Angeles. So for me, it's a question of, it's a matter of focusing on recycling, getting our water locally sourced quicker than otherwise is contemplated. It's a matter of focusing on cleaning up aquifers. It's a matter of stormwater recapture, and it's a matter of conservation. Each of those elements is critical to achieving this goal. And by the way, as Kevin alluded to, let's be very precise. It isn't just that we need to be able to withstand the drought because we need the water. 20% of the energy in the state is consumed with transferring water from one place to another. So from a sustainability standpoint, looking toward the future, we need to be having locally sourced water because it will help our climate crisis goals, as well as our drought-resistant needs here in Los Angeles.
Working in Congress, we just finished sending millions of dollars to LA for clean water, water recycling, as well as groundwater storage. And when the 3 of us were in the state legislature, During the time I served as Speaker, we actually did water legislation for the first time in 50 years. And we also developed the water bond. Now, we weren't able to put it on the ballot during that time because it was also in the middle of the Great Recession, but it eventually did get on the ballot. And so I think we need all of the above. I mean, as Kevin mentioned, I don't think the tunnels will solve the problem, but we do need that. We need all of it. But I do think, again, it's an area where LA has done really well. So yes, we need to do more, but I think it is important to celebrate our victories because we have been excellent in terms of conservation. You mentioned the ocean water, and maybe, desalinization is a very controversial subject, but maybe we can get to the point where we could do desal. That's different than bringing it in and putting it in, a tank or something, but to have the plant that actually, removes the salt from the water. And at some point in time, hopefully that technology develops so that we can mitigate the environmental concerns.
We turn now to questions from our audience, which means there is 1 minute on the clock for each of these questions, beginning with Kevin De Leon. What is your plan to make it safer and more pleasant to walk, bike, and use public transit in LA?
Thank you very much. As the author of a piece of legislation in Sacramento that facilitated Measure M on the ballot, making LA much more sustainable, walkable, and bike-friendly is going to be really critical because that enhances the quality of life for a city like Los Angeles that oftentimes, as my colleagues have made reference to, will agree, we have this trashy image. We have an image that it's you walking or a bicycle walking, and it's you competing with a $5,000 piece of metal. And that is a real big issue because we've had a lot of deaths and serious injuries because of pedestrian as well as bicycle tragedies due to vehicles. So as mayor, I would make this city a much more sustainable and walkable city with the right infrastructure dollars, with the right dollars as mayor of the commission, well, not the commission, I should say, but the Metro Board as well. We'll have 3 members there. I got it, okay. Time's up.
It is faster this time.
This is 1 minute.
To you. It's 1 minute, you're correct.
Did you tell me it was 1 minute?
Yes.
You did? Okay, I just want to make sure.
I did forget the Congress member on that one question.
I didn't want to make sure.
That is my bad, but no.
I'll play the tape.
Play the tape.
Mike,
verify. Trust but verify.
All right, thanks. So when I was a legislator, I wrote the law to authorize Measure R to come to the ballot, $35 billion for public transit. Zev and I worked very closely, Antonio, and with the Business Council to both get that measure on the ballot and then to get it passed. Now, we're building that subway, and as mayor, I'm going to be working to accelerate the pace of that as much as I can, but there's another ingredient to making the public transit system appealing to our riders. My son was just downtown a couple nights ago and was saying how uncomfortable it was to be on the subway here. He lives in Boston because there's so few people on it. Why are they on it? Because they don't feel safe there. And that's a real issue for us. And as mayor, I'm going to work to assure that our transit system is both safe and cleaner than it is now, so people are finding it appealing. Our bus routes need to be expanded. We need more buses on our best used routes. We need to be focusing on slower streets in communities. We had to have more protected bike paths on our streets. These are all ingredients of what it takes to make our city a more sustainable and livable one. And we can make sure that people, just really quickly, our land use policies need to assure that people can walk or use bikes to get to jobs and to services every day. And that's what we're all working on together.
As an avid bike rider, I think that our bike lanes I don't bike in the city, I go to the beach. Because frankly, the bike lanes need to be protected with some type of barrier, maybe not a concrete barrier, but something. And I think we also have to repair our city streets. There's some places where you can't walk down the sidewalk because it's all cracked. And then also, people have to have places to walk too. So it's another equity issue. It's not the same in all neighborhoods.
Well, let's talk about Vision Zero, which I believe has been a zero vision because you're still seeing these spikes of traffic accidents, collisions, and fatalities. As mayor, I'm not going to give up on Vision Zero, but we'll implement those strategies and put it and prioritize those strategies. As mayor, also as a member of the MTA board, I'm going to call for free public transportation in the city of LA that would incentivize those to use public transit, and I believe more people use public transit. We'll have fewer people in cars. It will help with our emissions in our city. But free transportation is worthless when people don't feel safe, as Mike alluded to. Free transportation would be worthless if people don't feel safe. You have crime happening on our subways and our buses. You have open drug use. And this is why I support actually having policing our public transportation sectors.
Beginning with Mike Fewer, the question is to reduce the cost of building housing. Are you willing to reduce or eliminate parking minimums and/or street widening requirements?
Yes, I think we need to be looking at reducing parking minimums, and I've said it already when I referred to the Transit-Oriented Communities program, which already has embedded in it reducing parking minimums. I would not do that everywhere. But when you're talking about a location that's near a transit corridor, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. There are a lot of young people who don't drive right now. Neither of my kids owns a car, for example. One of them lives in Boston, where it's easier not to have a car, and one lives here. And I think that if we can find a way to create more, put it this way, the less the parking requirement is, the more funding can be devoted to creating affordable housing above. And that's our imperative right now. So bottom line, near transit corridors, absolutely. As I said, I want to look at further advancing the TOC program. I might say, for example, instead of being near the intersection of 2 transit stops, it could be near 1 transit stop. We could be considering expanding the distance from those locations where we could use the TOC program. There are lots of ways for us to take advantage of existing models where the reduction in parking has enabled us to create affordability above.
Congressmember Bass.
I do think we should reduce the parking requirements, but we have to make sure that we don't then make it more difficult for seniors and for people with disabilities. So just saying blanketly we're going to reduce parking, we really have to consider that, because maybe I might live near a train, but maybe I can't walk to it. So I think we have to take that into consideration. Elders and people with disabilities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with both Mike and Karen. For me, it's a case-by-case scenario. This is why I believe we have to create these commercial centers like we've done in downtown San Pedro, where it's livable, walkable, where people work so they don't have to jump on transit or head downtown. That's what I'll prioritize as mayor, the importance of updating these community plans so it's livable and walkable. And we also want to be able to preserve our neighborhoods as well. And we are still in a car culture. We are not getting rid of our cars anytime soon. That's not to say that, we're going to be a city that's car-free, but let's be mindful of that as we're building these developments out.
Yeah, I think we all agree with each other. I think we have to be smart the way we go about doing it. I think downtown LA, for example, my goal, my vision is to make it a very sustainable, walkable, city core for the greater region of Los Angeles County. If we're going to actually get those investments and that capital to grow economically and to build specifically the housing that we need so desperately vertically, it is absolutely critical that we be much more flexible. And if that has been one of the regulations that has actually blocked and obstructed, among many other factors, the growth that's needed for LA, then the answer is absolutely yes.
So the next question is, beginning with Congressmember Bass, what accountability measures can be put in place to address bad actors in law enforcement?
Well, one, I think I led the effort in Congress for police reform, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And a couple of the basic principles of that is accountability and transparency. And I think that is critical. When there are bad actors, we need to say that they have to go. They absolutely have to be made accountable. The other thing is that we need a database that basically tracks bad actors, because in some cities you can have a situation where we wind up recruiting somebody. I think here we have a better situation in terms of background checks, but we need to do better in terms of recruitment and training, and then we also need to look at the people that do the training. What type of training do they do? What level of evaluation and accountability do the trainers have? There needs to be regular evaluation of officers. And when there are problems, one of the chief complaints from communities is that they make complaints about officers and the complaints go nowhere. So I think we need to have better accountability there as well.
The first message as mayor would be to the LAPD officers. I see you, I respect you, I was one of you, and I got your back. But the moment you tarnish the badge, I'll be the first to hold you accountable. You know, let's be mindful. LAPD is the largest reformed police department in this country. As a young officer, I embraced the consent decree. That made us a more professional, inclusive police department. That's not to say that it's perfect. In fact, one of the core values of the LAPD is quality through continuous improvement that I've embraced and has been part of my DNA as a police officer. We do have systems in place. We have the risk management information system that came out of the consent decree. Going back to restoring faith and trust between police officers and the community. It's been in my DNA why I joined the LAPD. It goes back to making sure that we have a police department that mirrors the people of Los Angeles. 80% of LAPD are either people of color or women, and we embrace that. And we'll do more of these reforms. And I'll take a page out of what Eric Adams said in New York. We can't have justice and safety at the same time.
Accountability is absolutely critical, and I don't want any police officer walking or patrolling our city streets who are not going to protect and serve the people of Los Angeles. I don't care who you are, I don't care where you come from. So accountability is absolutely critical. There's no room for tolerance for that. We have to restore the confidence in our own LAPD. I want to be very clear here. The vast majority of our LAPD officers do an exemplary job. They put their lives on the line every single day to protect life as well as property. I think they've done a fantastic job. We do have a smaller element without question, and therefore we need accountability. But let me talk about something too, because interestingly, LAPD is one of the most diverse institutions in the United States of America. They're more diverse than political parties are, than the Congress are. They're more diverse than the University of California system, because it is super majority minority. So it's a question of how do you change culture? And culture starts at the LAPD Academy. And if you have norms and mores, values that are from the old LAPD, regardless if you're a person of color, then you adopt those norms and mores. And those cultural changes have to start in the LAPD Academy.
So, I think it's essential, as I said earlier, for the mayor to stand up and clearly state that our law enforcement officers are to be respected, and I support you. But it's also the case that we have to have accountability systems, and we have many of them, but they could improve. For example, the voters of the city went along with an idea that I did not support, which was civilianizing the boards of rights, on the premise that sounded good, but in reality, those boards of rights were doing a much less effective job at assuring accountability. I might look at reversing that decision. Next, there is, this week, on the Police Commission's agenda, an approach that enhances accountability. It suggests that officers need, with their body-worn cameras, to state why they are conducting a traffic stop, before that stop happens. This is designed to avoid racial profiling in the field. That's an accountability mechanism that is preventing something from happening as opposed to reacting after someone has been victimized. And I support those kinds of changes. I'm sorry.
Our final question for the morning, as we all brace ourselves to disperse and head out to the great beyond that is the 405. Beginning with Councilmember Buscaino, what will you do to address traffic and commute times as an economic and quality of life issue?
Well, traffic is probably the top of mind, aside from, of course, crime and homelessness. We spend so much time in our cars. I think we just got to be really mindful and think outside the box. Something that I believe was brought up during the last, when we had an open seat in the mayor's election, was to look and seek finding ways to have reversible lanes in peak hours of the day. Makes too much sense, I think. Why is it that on Wilshire Boulevard, during peak hours from 7 to 9, it's a one-way into downtown. Also, during peak hours between 5 and 7, one way out into these main corridors. We got to think outside the box. The subway, the monorail project that I support, above ground monorail project along the 405. I'm happy to see that through as mayor and as a representative of the MTA. Sorry, my time up? Okay, sorry. So yes, on monorail.
Traffic and congestion impacts our lives daily. It affects work productivity. Quite frankly, it makes us very cranky because it impacts our lives away from loved ones, from your children. And I know what it feels like when we're stuck and we have to get to this debate or that debate and we're stuck behind traffic. The 405 adjacent to us on the right obviously is a parking lot. And the next mayor will lead the Metro Board with 3 other appointees, and with a few others, you have a majority. And that means it is critical leadership to have a vision, to know how to make the right behavioral changes to get middle-class folks and upper middle-class folks out of their cars also to into public transportation. The way the current public transportation system is, there is no incentive. Now, I understand that for a whole variety of reasons, but we have to have the right leadership that has the vision to make it pervasive and prolific throughout the city so we can get folks off, because it's not like New York or Boston or London with the tube or Mexico City or elsewhere. But we have an opportunity to revision and transform our public transportation system and get all of you into that system.
You lose 119 hours a year stuck in traffic. And what does that mean? It's not just a productivity issue. It means you're away from your families and your loved ones. It means you're not patronizing the arts or going to that restaurant you might want to go to because it's too far to get there. So what does a mayor do? Besides the measures I've described earlier regarding public transit, not just rail, but also the bus system to which I referred, the mayor can take creative steps to make public employees, of whom there are tens of thousands in our city, more likely to telecommute on many days. That will reduce some time on the streets. And, you know, when it comes to other aspects of our traffic issue, we're going to have to not only make sure that we have light rail and fixed rail and bus systems that work, but as I said earlier, people have to want to get back on them. The pandemic has turned them off, as has safety issues turned them off. I mentioned before, and I'll say it again, as mayor, I'm going to assure that those cars and buses are clean and safe, so that people feel that they're inspired to get out of the vehicles that otherwise are clogging our roads.
Thank you, Congressmember Bass.
Well, those of you that were here in 1984 when we had the Olympics and everybody was scared to death that it was going to be crazy in the city, Mayor Bradley pulled the businesses together and we came up with a system where different people were on the road at different times, and it was great. So we just went through a pandemic. We didn't have any of the technology. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have anything in 1984. So given the experience that we went through with the pandemic, and I believe that work is beginning to fundamentally change, and we are telecommuting more and more, what I want to do is meet and say, can't we coordinate this so that public transportation, believe it, want it, know it's going to happen, even though I've been hearing about it all my life? Why can't we organize things? Why can't we organize work in a way that we can have much less traffic by increasing telecommunication? Our city functioned during the pandemic. So can't we continue to function and address traffic by coordinating who is on the road and when?
Maybe we should go back to Thomas Guides after all. I
miss the Thomas Guides.
I want to sincerely thank all 4 of our candidates who joined us today. We all know how busy you are, and we really appreciate your taking the time. I want to give my sincere thanks to Mary and Adam and Rachel and everyone with LABC. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.